The layout of Chichen Itza site core developed during its earlier phase of occupation, between 750 and 900 AD. Its final layout was developed after 900 AD, and the 10th century saw the rise of the city as a regional capital controlling the area from central Yucatan to the north coast, with its power extending down the east and west coasts of the peninsula. The earliest hieroglyphic date discovered at Chichen Itza is equivalent to 832 AD, while the last known date was recorded in the Osario Temple in 998. The late classic city was centered upon the area to the southwest of the ex-Talic cenote, with the main architecture represented by the substructures now underlying the Las Monjas and Observatorio and the basal platform upon which they were built. Chichen Itza rose to regional prominence toward the end of the early classic period, roughly 600 AD. It was, however, toward the end of the late classic and into the early part of the terminal classic that the site became a major regional capital, centralizing and dominating political, socio-cultural, economic, and ideological life in the northern Maya lowlands. The ascension of Chichen Itza roughly correlates with the decline and fragmentation of the major centers of the southern Maya lowlands. As Chichen Itza rose to prominence, the cities of Yaxuna, to the south, and Coba, to the east, were suffering decline. These two cities had been mutual allies, with Yaxuna dependent upon Coba. At some point in the 10th century, Coba lost a significant portion of its territory, isolating Yaxuna, and Chichen Itza may have directly contributed to the collapse of both cities. According to some colonial Mayan sources, e.g., the Book of Chilam Balam of Chumayel, Hunak Seal, ruler of Mayapan, conquered Chichen Itza in the 13th century. Hunak Seal supposedly prophesied his own rise to power. According to custom at the time, individuals thrown into the cenote sagrado were believed to have the power of prophecy if they survived. During one such ceremony, the chronicles state, there were no survivors, so Hunak Seal leapt into the cenote sagrado, and when removed, prophesied his own ascension. While there is some archaeological evidence that indicates Chichen Itza was at one time looted and sacked, there appears to be greater evidence that it could not have been by Mayapan, at least not when Chichen Itza was an active urban center. Archaeological data now indicates that Chichen Itza declined as a regional center by 1100, before the rise of Mayapan. Ongoing research at the site of Mayapan may help resolve this chronological conundrum. After Chichen Itza elite activities ceased, the city may not have been abandoned. When the Spanish arrived, they found a thriving local population, although it is not clear from Spanish sources if these Maya were living in Chichen Itza proper, or a nearby settlement. The relatively high population density in the region was a factor in the conquistadors' decision to locate a capital there. According to post-conquest sources, both Spanish and Maya, the cenote sagrado remained a place of pilgrimage. In 1526, Spanish conquistador Francisco de Montejo, a veteran of the Grijalva and Cortés expeditions, successfully petitioned the King of Spain for a charter to conquer Yucatan. His first campaign in 1527, which covered much of the Yucatan Peninsula, decimated his forces but ended with the establishment of a small fort at Zamanha, south of what is today Cancun. Montejo returned to Yucatan in 1531 with reinforcements and established his main base at Campeche on the west coast. He sent his son, Francisco Montejo the Younger, in late 1532 to conquer the interior of the Yucatan Peninsula from the north. The objective from the beginning was to go to Chichen Itza and establish a capital. Montejo the Younger eventually arrived at Chichen Itza, which he renamed Ciudad Real. At first he encountered no resistance, and set about dividing the lands around the city and awarding them to his soldiers. The Maya became more hostile over time, and eventually they laid siege to the Spanish, cutting off their supply line to the coast, and forcing them to barricade themselves among the ruins of the ancient city. Months passed, but no reinforcements arrived. Montejo the Younger attempted an all-out assault against the Maya and lost 150 of his remaining troops. He was forced to abandon Chichen Itza in 1534 under cover of darkness. By 1535, all Spanish had been driven from the Yucatan Peninsula. Montejo eventually returned to Yucatan and, by recruiting Maya from Campeche and Champoten, built a large Indo-Spanish army and conquered the peninsula. The Spanish crown later issued a land grant that included Chichen Itza, and by 1588 it was a working cattle ranch. Chichen Itza entered the popular imagination in 1843 with the book Incidents of Travel in Yucatan by John Lloyd Stephens, with illustrations by Frederick Catherwood. The book recounted Stephens' visit to Yucatan and his tour of Maya cities, including Chichen Itza. The book prompted other explorations of the city. In 1860, Desire Charnay surveyed Chichen Itza and took numerous photographs that he published in Cités et Ruines Américaines, 1863. Visitors to Chichen Itza during the 1870s and 1880s came with photographic equipment and recorded more accurately the condition of several buildings. In 1875, Augustus Laplongeon and his wife Alice Dixon Laplongeon visited Chichen, and excavated a statue of a figure on its back, knees drawn up, upper torso raised on its elbows with a plate on its stomach. Augustus Laplongeon called it Chakmal, later renamed Chakmul, which has been the term to describe all types of this statuary found in Mesoamerica. Theobert Mailer and Alfred Maudslay explored Chichen in the 1880s and both spent several weeks at the site and took extensive photographs. Maudslay published the first long-form description of Chichen Itza in his book, Biología Centrali Americana. In 1894, the United States consul to Yucatan, Edward Herbert Thompson, purchased the Hacienda Chichen, which included the ruins of Chichen Itza. For 30 years, Thompson explored the ancient city. His discoveries included the earliest dated carving upon a lintel in the temple of the initial series and the excavation of several graves in the Osario High Priest's Temple. Thompson is most famous for dredging the Cenote Sagrado, Sacred Cenote, from 1904 to 1910, where he recovered artifacts of gold, copper and carved jade, as well as the first ever examples of what were believed to be pre-Columbian Maya cloth and wooden weapons. Thompson shipped the bulk of the artifacts to the Peabody Museum at Harvard University. In 1913, the Carnegie Institution accepted the proposal of archaeologist Sylvanus G. Morley and committed to conduct long-term archaeological research at Chichen Itza. The Mexican Revolution and the following government instability, as well as World War I, delayed the project by a decade. In 1923, the Mexican government awarded the Carnegie Institution a 10-year permit, later extended another 10 years, to allow U.S. archaeologists to conduct extensive excavation and restoration of Chichen Itza. Carnegie researchers excavated and restored the Temple of Warriors and the Caracol, among other major buildings. At the same time, the Mexican government excavated and restored El Castillo, Temple of Kukulkan, and the Great Ball Court. In 1926, the Mexican government charged Edward Thompson with theft, claiming he stole the artifacts from the Cenote Sagrado and smuggled them out of the country. The government seized the Hacienda Chichen. Thompson, who was in the United States at the time, never returned to Yucatan. He wrote about his research and investigations of the Maya culture in a book People of the Serpent published in 1932. He died in New Jersey in 1935. In 1944, the Mexican Supreme Court ruled that Thompson had broken no laws and returned Chichen Itza to his heirs. The Thompsons sold the hacienda to tourism pioneer Fernando Barbachano Peon. There have been two later expeditions to recover artifacts from the Cenote Sagrado, in 1961 and 1967. The first was sponsored by the National Geographic, and the second by private interests. Both projects were supervised by Mexico's National Institute of Anthropology and History (INAH). INAH has conducted an ongoing effort to excavate and restore other monuments in the archaeological zone, including the Osario, Acab Jib, and several buildings in Chichen Viejo, Old Chichen. In 2009, to investigate construction that predated El Castillo, Yucatec archaeologists began excavations adjacent to El Castillo under the direction of Rafael Raich Cobos. Chichen Itza is one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico. In 2017, it was estimated to have received 2.1 million visitors. Tourism has been a factor at Chichen Itza for more than a century. John Lloyd Stevens, who popularized the Maya Yucatan in the public's imagination with his book Incidents of Travel in Yucatan, inspired many to make a pilgrimage to Chichen Itza. Even before the book was published, Benjamin Norman and Baron Emanuel von Friedrichsthal traveled to Chichen after meeting Stevens, and both published the results of what they found. Friedrichsthal was the first to photograph Chichen Itza, using the recently invented daguerreotype. After Edward Thompson in 1894 purchased the Hacienda Chichen, which included Chichen Itza, he received a constant stream of visitors. In 1910 he announced his intention to construct a hotel on his property, but abandoned those plans, probably because of the Mexican Revolution. In the early 1920s, a group of Yucatecans, led by writer-photographer Francisco Gómez Rull, began working toward expanding tourism to Yucatan. They urged Governor Felipe Carrillo Puerto to build roads to the more famous monuments, including Chichen Itza. In 1923, Governor Carrillo Puerto officially opened the highway to Chichen Itza. Gómez Rull published one of the first guidebooks to Yucatan and the ruins. Gómez Rull's son-in-law, Fernando Barbachano Peon, a grandnephew of former Yucatan Governor Miguel Barbachano, started Yucatan's first official tourism business in the early 1920s. He began by meeting passengers who arrived by steamship at Progreso, the port north of Mérida, and persuading them to spend a week in Yucatan, after which they would catch the next steamship to their next destination. In his first year, Barbachano Peon reportedly was only able to convince 7 passengers to leave the ship and join him on a tour. In the mid-1920s, Barbachano Peon persuaded Edward Thompson to sell 5 acres, 20,000 square meters, next to Chichen for a hotel. In 1930, the Mayaland Hotel opened, just north of the Hacienda Chichen, which had been taken over by the Carnegie Institution. In 1944, Barbachano Peon purchased all of the Hacienda Chichen, including Chichen Itza, from the heirs of Edward Thompson. Around that same time, the Carnegie Institution completed its work at Chichen Itza and abandoned the Hacienda Chichen, which Barbachano turned into another seasonal hotel. In 1972, Mexico enacted the Ley Federal sobre Monumentos y Zonas Arqueológicas, Artísticas y Históricas, federal law over monuments and archaeological, artistic and historic sites, that put all the nation's pre-Columbian monuments, including those at Chichen Itza, under federal ownership. There were now hundreds, if not thousands, of visitors every year to Chichen Itza, and more were expected with the development of the Cancun resort area to the east. In the 1980s, Chichen Itza began to receive an influx of visitors on the day of the spring equinox. Today several thousand show up to see the light and shadow effect on the temple of Kukulkan, during which the feathered serpent appears to crawl down the side of the pyramid. Tour guides will also demonstrate a unique acoustical effect at Chichen Itza. A handclap before the staircase of the El Castillo pyramid will produce by an echo that resembles the chirp of a bird, similar to that of the Quetzal, as investigated by de Klerk. Chichen Itza, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, is the second most visited of Mexico's archaeological sites. The archaeological site draws many visitors from the popular tourist resort of Cancun, who make a day trip on tour buses. In 2007, Chichen Itza's Temple of Kukulkan, El Castillo, was named one of the new 7 wonders of the world after a worldwide vote. Despite the fact that the vote was sponsored by a commercial enterprise, and that its methodology was criticized, the vote was embraced by government and tourism officials in Mexico, who projected that as a result of the publicity, the number of tourists to Chichen would double by 2012. The ensuing publicity reignited debate in Mexico over the ownership of the site, which culminated on the 29th of March 2010 when the state of Yucatan purchased the land upon which the most recognized monuments rest from owner Hans-Jürgen Thies Barbachano. INA, which manages the site, has closed a number of monuments to public access. While visitors can walk around them, they can no longer climb them or go inside their chambers. Climbing access to El Castillo was closed after a San Diego, California, woman fell to her death in 2006. Chichen Itza was a large pre-Columbian city built by the Maya people of the Terminal Classic period. The archaeological site is located in Tinam Municipality, Yucatan State, Mexico. Chichen Itza was a major focal point in the northern Maya lowlands from the late Classic c. AD 600 to 900, through the Terminal Classic c. AD 800 to 900, and into the early portion of the post-Classic period c. AD 900–1200. The site exhibits a multitude of architectural styles, reminiscent of styles seen in central Mexico and of the Puuc and Shen styles of the northern Maya lowlands. The presence of Central Mexican styles was once thought to have been representative of direct migration or even conquest from central Mexico, but most contemporary interpretations view the presence of these non-Maya styles more as the result of cultural diffusion. Chichen Itza was one of the largest Maya cities, and it was likely to have been one of the mythical Great Cities, or Talans, referred to in later Mesoamerican literature. The city may have had the most diverse population in the Maya world, a factor that could have contributed to the variety of architectural styles at the site. The ruins of Chichen Itza are federal property, and the site's stewardship is maintained by Mexico's Instituto Nacional de Antropología y Historia, National Institute of Anthropology and History. The land under the monuments had been privately owned until the 29th of March 2010, when it was purchased by the state of Yucatan. Chichen Itza is one of the most visited archaeological sites in Mexico, with over 2.6 million tourists in 2017. The Maya name, Chichen Itza, means, at the mouth of the well of the Itza. This derives from Kai, meaning, mouth, or, edge, and Chen or Chin, meaning, well. Itza is the name of an ethnic lineage group that gained political and economic dominance of the Northern Peninsula. One possible translation for Itza is enchanter or enchantment of the water, from its sorcerer, and water. The name is spelled Chichen Itza in Spanish, and the accents are sometimes maintained in other languages to show that both parts of the name are stressed on their final syllable. Other references prefer the Maya orthography, Chichen Itza pronounced Titan Itza. This form preserves the phonemic distinction between and ch, since the base word chin, which, however, is not stressed in Maya, begins with a postalveolar ejective affricate consonant. The word, Itza, has a high tone on the followed by a glottal stop, indicated by the apostrophe. Evidence in the Chilam Balam books indicates another, earlier name for this city prior to the arrival of the Itza hegemony in northern Yucatan. While most sources agree the first word means 7, there is considerable debate as to the correct translation of the rest. This earlier name is difficult to define because of the absence of a single standard of orthography, but it is represented variously as Uuc Yabnal, 7 Great House. Uuc Habnal, 7 Bushy Places, Uasayabnal, 7 Great Rulers, or Uc Abnal, 7 Lines of Abnal. This name, dating to the late Classic period, is recorded both in the Book of Chilam Balam de Chumayel and in hieroglyphic texts in the ruins. Chichen Itza is located in the eastern portion of Yucatan state in Mexico. The northern Yucatan peninsula is karst, and the rivers in the interior all run underground. There are 4 visible, natural sinkholes, called cenotes, that could have provided plentiful water year-round at Chichen, making it attractive for settlement. Of these cenotes, the cenote sagrado, or sacred cenote, also variously known as the sacred well or well of sacrifice, is the most famous. In 2015, scientists determined that there is a hidden cenote under Kukulkan, which has never been seen by archaeologists. Chichen Itza was a major economic power in the northern Maya lowlands during its apogee. Participating in the water-borne circum-peninsular trade route through its port site of Isla Cerritos on the north coast, Chichen Itza was able to obtain locally unavailable resources from distant areas such as obsidian from central Mexico and gold from southern Central America. Between AD 900 and 1050, Chichen Itza expanded to become a powerful regional capital controlling north and central Yucatan. It established Isla Cerritos as a trading port.